Am I my brother's keeper? This is a phrase that is asked at the very beginning of human history. We have Adam and Eve. And Adam and Eve fall short of God's plan and God's heart. They end up seeking to become independent beings from God. And, in terms of this, whether this was confusion or whether other things are going on, it's really hard to tell from the text. But ultimately, they choose to eat a fruit that God said, don't eat. And in the midst of their eating from fruit that they were told not to eat, they find that the spirituality, the connection that was both with each other and also with God himself and with the entire creation and the entire order of spirituality that was built around them, all of this is broken. And all of a sudden, because of this disobedience, they have to learn how to live independently. So the curse turns into what they actually desired. So they have a pair of sons. There is Cain and there is Abel. And in the midst of the two sons, what you end up having is you have a son who puts in real effort and real energy and really wants to end up being pleasing to God. And you have another son who wants to please God but doesn't want to put the effort into doing so. And so as there are only two of them that are recorded in this story at this point in time, there is opportunity for one son to emulate his brother and to do better. And there's also the opportunity to become the best by becoming the only one. And throughout history, there has been a tendency, whether it's through individual families, whether it's through tribes, whether it's through nations, to take a look around and go, am I being accepted on my own terms? Is my effort being rewarded? Or is there someone else who does better than I do? Now, when you live on a planet where there are billions of people, from my vantage point, it's pretty easy to understand that anything that I ever do, there will be people who do it better than I do, and there will be people who do it worse than I do. And on a certain level, that's fairly freeing. And understanding that God loves us not based on performance, but at the same time, the Lord wants us to grow into the potential that He's given us. I don't need to compare myself to wealthy people. I don't need to compare myself to the greatest orators or communicators of this era. I don't need to compare myself to the greatest scholars of this era. I don't need to compare myself to the people who are most expert at technology and media. I don't need to compare myself to the best musicians of this era. God has uniquely gifted each one of us to the point where we have different aspects of who we are. And when we have different aspects of who we are, we get to be us. And if we think that other people are better than we are in areas that matter to us, we have the opportunity to grow, we have the opportunity to develop, and we can become better at things that we aspire to learn about, to apply ourselves, to develop, and to become superior at. The problem is when we end up deciding that we want to take a shortcut. When we decide that we do not have time, we do not have energy, we do not have ability, or we do not think we should have to end up becoming a transformed people. that leads to the original quote, "Am I my brother's keeper?" This was spoken by Cain when he had murdered his brother. And he thought that by faking the fact that he didn't know where his brother was, that he could trick an all-knowing God into not understanding that he had committed the first murder in human history. The response God had to Cain was heartbreaking. He said, "Your brother's blood cries out from the ground." And Cain was in a position where he morally seems to have been oblivious, even unaware of what he had done. He does not seem to have been in a position where he understood what the shedding of blood, what murder, what allowing your rage, your upset, and your sense of not being accepted does to the creation around us. I mention this today because every so often, regularly in the news at this point in time, and I'm sure at a point after this has been posted, this will be repeated. There are those who believe themselves to be unloved. There are those who believe themselves to be unworthy. There are those who believe themselves to not be valued or treasured, who go out and in the midst of their rage and in the midst of their anger, they draw blood. We have gotten accustomed to having people become so enraged that they will go to a church, they will go to a synagogue, they will go to a shopping mall, they will go to a movie, they will go to a former workplace, or they will do something else and end up wreaking as much havoc and destruction as they can. Originally, when this first started, the country was horrified. Now we've gotten accustomed to the new normal, where people shrug their shoulders and go, well, things happen. God has not become impervious to this. God does not shrug his shoulders. God, who witnessed the first murder of brother against brother, the first brother who felt like he was not in a sufficiently privileged position and what he had wasn't good enough, and furthermore wasn't willing to put in the energy to do better. He killed his brother. And God has witnessed the movement of the spirit of murder through our generation. And honestly, in the time you live in, it's a big deal. And we see this not only with individuals, we see this not only in communities, we see this not only in our country, but we see the murderous impulse moving through terror organizations and wreaking havoc upon states. And sometimes when people become murderous, the response is overwhelming. Because when someone becomes murderous, when terror is unleashed against a group of people, you can't be proportional in your response. You have to win. Because otherwise the murderous impulse continues to live and will continue to break out again and again and again until it's finished. This is why the United States had to do what it did in World War II against Nazi Germany. This is why the emperor who was worshipped as a god in Japan had to be utterly destroyed politically, and Japan had to be disarmed. Because once people become murderous, you can't simply teach them a lesson and expect them to behave better. And this is what we've seen in the Muslim Arab and the Israeli-Jewish conflict. There is no way to end up dealing with the murder in the heart without taking out things to the point where it can never be allowed to happen again. Do we mourn the blood that's spilled? Absolutely. Does God like some blood and not other blood when it comes to humanity? Not at all. But if murder and if rage has been planted in the hearts of people, it will keep on doing what it does unless it's eradicated. Shalom.